Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the Sunday Motivational Call with Andrew. Andrew is going to talk a little bit more about our engagement with God, our Father, and other things surrounding that. Here you go, Andrew. Have fun.
Thank you. Good evening, good morning, good afternoon, wherever you are. It's good to be with you again. So the Americans celebrated something called Thanksgiving this week. I don't know how many Americans we have on the call at the moment, but who did you thank? Who did you thank? Who did you thank for the fact that you are still alive and kicking and able to enjoy the turkey and the pumpkin pie on that special day? Always a very interesting perspective. Yeah, we thank God. We thank Him for giving us life, for giving us fresh breath each and every morning and the ability to swing our legs off the side of the bed and stand up and journey into a new day. So last week we spoke about understanding this relationship that is actually desired and the reason why we were created and what we were designed for and put in this place called Earth, so that we could relate to God, to be in relationship with Him, and that we could learn to understand Him and trust Him and grow in relationship as our Father, the Father of all creation. And I shared something with you from the book of Corinthians, revealing His character and what His character is. And then I gave you a little bit of homework and a challenge for this week, and that was to try and identify some of those characteristics in your life and in Him, and to start to learn to trust Him in those characteristics and to grow in an understanding of His desire to want to be your Father. Now, the entire story of David in the Old Testament is actually a love story about a relationship between a father and a son, and how from very early on, God's love and favor towards David is evident in the story, and how God sets him apart and anoints him to be a king and take over the rulership of Israel. And this all happened at a very young age, and David did eventually ascend to take the throne from Saul. But in the early years of David's life, we see some very interesting things in the way that he relates to God and how he does everything for the glory of God. We read about how he defended his father's sheep from the lion and the bear, and how he gives God the praise and the glory for the intervention in that, and how he is a young boy who was able to stem off this lion and the bear. And then we obviously know the story of David and Goliath, and how David prepares to go into this battle. And before he goes to the battle, he actually meets with Saul, who was the king at the time, and Saul was petrified of Goliath and the Philistines. And Saul was actually one of the strongest fighting men of Israel. And they had this conversation between the two of them, this young boy David and King Saul. And Saul asked his armor bearers to bring out his best armor, and said to David that he should put that on to go into the battle, because he would need some sort of protection. And David just sort of laughed it off and said, I can't wear these. They're too big, and they're not designed for me, and not created for me to wear. But I know that I'll be safe because God will lead me in this. And God directs David down to the side of the stream, and he collects 5 stones, and he prepares himself for battle in the way that he knew to protect his father's sheep. And now he was called, or put himself in a position where he would go and defend his father's sheep, the Lord's sheep, the tribe of Israel, how he would step up into the battle line to be that defender. And the only way that he knew how was with a sling and some stones, because that's how he had kept off the wild beasts from attacking the sheep of his dad Jesse. And now he was going to defend the sheep of his father God. And he prepared himself in that way because God had trained him and shaped him in that. And then he steps up onto the battle line, and Goliath steps up and he shouts some obscenities towards David or Israel. And David says, "How dare you defy the armies of the living God? This day he will deliver your head into my hands." And David prepares his sling and he takes aim and he swings that sling around, and the stone shoots out of that sling and it claps Goliath between the eyes. Those of you that don't know what claps is, ask a good South African person. It smacks him square between the eyes, and this giant falls down dead. And David sets Israel free from the torment of the Philistines. And eventually he ascends and he takes the throne from Saul and he becomes Israel's king. And it's in that place of responsibility that the wheels kind of fall off and the distance or the wedge gets put into this relationship. Because David is now sort of at the pinnacle. He's the king of Israel. He rules over these people. He has servants at his beck and call. He has wealth that is unaccountable. He is in this position of incredible power, incredible responsibility, and incredible favor. And in that place, like I said, this wedge is sort of hammered into this relationship between him and God. And in that separation, the wheels fall off. And David commits adultery. And he commits murder. And he becomes a liar and a thief. But yet in Scripture it says that David was a man after God's own heart. And so what I learned from this story, remember I said the entire story of David is actually a love story between a father and a son about that relationship. And what I learned in that is that it's okay to make mistakes. God is not interested in perfection. If he wanted perfect beings, he would have invented Xerox and photocopied himself. But what he is interested in is us learning to grow into the fullness of that father-son relationship with him, where we can actually reflect the fullness of his character. Now, David had had a fantastic walk up until he became king. There was this amazing relationship between him and God. And it happens so often in our lives when we become prosperous, we forget God. In sadness and sorrow, sometimes we forget God. In a position of pride, a position of responsibility and leadership, we forget God. And we kind of put ourselves on the pedestal. And so as we journey through life, we need to keep that relationship whole and wholesome. And we need to keep that relationship alive. And we need to make sure that we put God at the center of everything that we do, that our Father is the first one that we consult, that our Father is the one who directs our steps, that our Father is the one who protects our paths, that our Father is the one who we can trust and surrender ourselves to. And, you know, there's so many times in the Psalms where David writes, after all these things have happened, where he says to God, where can I go to escape from you? How can I get away from you? I don't deserve this love. I'm unworthy of this relationship. And God just looks at him and laughs and says, "You can't. No matter what you do, no matter where you go, no matter how terrible you feel, no matter how ashamed you feel, my love towards you remains the same, unwavering, unending, and unfailing. And I forgive you if you ask." And they continued in this journey of life together, and there were some really hot and cold moments. And in our physical relationships with our earthly fathers, we have the same sort of experience. And it's through that earthly experience that we kind of treat God in the same way. We drop the ball in something that we do in the journey of life, and we think, okay, we've disappointed our parents, or we failed in something again, or who knows what it is, but there can often be a wedge that's pushed in there to tarnish that relationship. And so we treat God in the same way. But God is unwavering, unending, and unfailing in his love towards us. And his character never, ever changes. He's the same yesterday, today, and forever. In a physical capacity, our fathers can and do often change. Sometimes it happens, as they age and things happen there, or they get involved with the wrong crowd, or they get involved with the wrong things, and alcohol takes the lead role, or gambling, or something like that. And so our fathers, our physical fathers, change in that character. So we know that they are not consistently the same, whereas God is. He's the same yesterday, today, and forever. And the importance of knowing that in this relationship, that he is a constant and there is no change in him, is the fact that we can and know that we can wholeheartedly trust in him, in his leadership, in his guidance, in his knowledge, in his wisdom, in his strength, in his understanding. The word says his ways are not our ways, and his thoughts are high above. But the plans that he has for us are plans to prosper us and not to harm us, plans to give us a hope and a great future. Now, when he sent Jesus to walk upon this earth and live among us for 33 and a half years, Jesus had to build that relationship with his Father in an earthly capacity. There wasn't this open portal to heaven, and they just kind of were connected to each other by some humongous, invisible umbilical cord. Jesus taught us in the way that he lived with us and among us how we have to learn to relate to our Father. And it's our Father. It's his Father is our Father. And he often withdrew himself from the busyness of the crowd, and he went to be somewhere in a quiet place to be alone with his Father, so that they could communicate, that he could pour out his heart, or that he could just listen and hear what it is that his Father had for him for that day. And many times in the New Testament, when Jesus speaks of himself, he says, "I can do nothing by myself, but I only do that which I see my Father do." Not hear my Father say, see my Father do. It's a work in action. And that is why this relationship is so important. And it's also why it's so difficult to build this relationship, because the examples that we've been set through our earthly fathers are very, very often tarnished and tainted. So they have this belief, our earthly fathers, that we must do what they say, not what they do. Where Jesus said, "I only do that which I see my Father do." because it's in that example of life and that example of character that we learn and grow. Those tarnished and tainted relationships with a father, an earthly father, can be so, so damaging. Now, about 10 years ago, no, maybe more than 10 years ago. Yeah, 20 odd years ago. I was in the United States for a couple of months, and it was around Mother's Day. And Hallmark decided to try something as almost like a social experiment. But anyway, they sent boxes and boxes of Mother's Day cards to all of the prisons around the country. And there was actually a shortage of cards. There were not enough for every prisoner. So they ran out of cards, but just about every prisoner got a card and wrote a Mother's Day card and sent it to their mother. And it was quite an overwhelming response. It was incredible, actually. And so Hallmark thought, well, let's do the same thing for Father's Day. And they prepared for it and they shipped out boxes and boxes of Father's Day cards. Only 3 Father's Day cards were sent from all the prisons that Father's Day cards were sent to across the United States. I mean, if that doesn't tell you that the earthly relationship between fathers and sons or fathers and daughters is tarnished and tainted, then I don't know what else will. There's some people on this call that have had amazing relationships with their dads, and that is fantastic. That in itself is a blessing. But there's so many that have not had that chance for that relationship. An absent father, a father whose life was controlled by a substance, maybe. A father who passed away when you were young. A stepfather who came into married life and took you on as a child, but you became a punching bag. Who knows? I don't know what your relationship is or was like with your earthly father. But I know that these are relationships that are foundational in our lives and are very, very important because they're meant to direct us to God and to that relationship with Him as Father. In my own life, my biological father and my mother got divorced when I was 5 years old. My biological father was an alcoholic. And the first time that he hit my mother was the last time that he hit my mother, because she was a very wise woman and she knew her worth and she knew that she was more valuable than being someone's punching bag. And so for her sake and our sake as children, she ended that relationship and they went their separate ways. Now that incident influenced my life in more ways than I probably even know. But at age 5, because of the example set by my father's actions, I knew that I would never, ever drink. I've never had an alcoholic beverage, and I probably never will have an alcoholic beverage because of a decision that I made based on the actions of my father's character when I was 5 years old. For those of you who don't know, I'm currently 45. So that's 40 years ago. And that's 40 years with no alcohol, no desire for it, no need for it. Now, I have an older brother who's 2.5 years older than me, who witnessed exactly the same event, who made his own life choices and his own life decisions. And for many years of his young adult life, teen life, young adult life, well into his early 30s, he was controlled by addiction. And the addiction was fueled by his anger towards my biological father. And I don't know at what point, and if even at any point, he has reached a place in his life where he's been able to speak out forgiveness against this man. But the anger is what fueled him. we were very fortunate and blessed that my mom met a very wonderful man who she married 2 years later, and he became my father, my stepdad. But I always refer to him as my dad. And we journeyed together through life, and he put us through school, and he was a very, or is a very wonderful man, very caring man, very diligent man. And although he had no personal relationship with God that was visible, in his character and in the way he treated my mother and in the way he treated us, it was evident to see the characteristics of God. And I came to faith in my final year of high school. I was just 16 years old. It was actually 5 days before my 17th birthday that I came to faith. And I made a decision then to accept Christ into my life. And through the last however many years it's been this journey of growing and learning and understanding to know God as my Father. And it was a very, very interesting experience I had in that process of coming to faith. And every time I would enter God's presence in the local church that I had decided to go to, I would stand there weeping with absolutely no idea why it was happening. And the tears would just flow and flow and flow and flow until somebody came and sat next to me and said, "You know what's happening?" And I said, "I haven't got a clue, but it's very embarrassing. And I come to church every Sunday with 4 handkerchiefs in my pocket, but I would like to know what is happening and why it's happening." And they said to me, "Well, obviously there's been some hurt and some brokenness in your past. And the Holy Spirit is working inside of you like a needle and thread and sewing up all those hurts and all that damage and all those things that have caused this pain. And when you can just submit to it, the healing and the restoration can take place." And so I learned from that, and so I did. But it was in this journey of my life that I had to go through certain things to get to a place of being able to identify God as my Father. Now, from a very young age, I had all these dreams and plans for my life, and I knew exactly what I was going to do and when I was going to do it and how I was going to do it and why I was going to do it. And I worked my entire childhood towards those things. At age 3, I said I was going to become a British police officer. That was my dream. That was my goal. It was everything I worked towards. And I finished high school and I went overseas and I got to that place and they weren't doing any sort of recruitment process at the time, so I couldn't sign up. And so I went traveling through Europe. And I was sitting up in the mountains in Switzerland one day, and this was probably only a year, maybe a year and a half after I had actually committed my life to the Lord. And I was sitting up in the mountains in a place called Kandersteg in Switzerland. And it was just myself and God. I don't know if he was there when I got there, but he showed up and he interrupted my thought process. And it was in that point that I realized that I was doing this out of my own desire. But I wanted to become a policeman out of my desire to want to help people. And then I had this engagement with God and this realization that I wouldn't actually be helping people, I'd always be reacting to things. And it's in that reaction where you're not really bringing about much change. And so I went back to the UK after about another 6 weeks of traveling or so and broke the news to my family that I was no longer going to become a policeman. And there was massive disappointment and sadness in family and a little bit of judgment, I guess. But that was where I was at. And eventually I returned back to South Africa and I started a little business and had some success with that. And the process sort of went on. And by the time I was in my early 20s, I was now on my fourth business. and got to a point in this journey where I actually lost everything. I lost my home, I lost my car, I almost lost my left leg through a freak accident and was told I would probably only ever get about 10% use of my leg back. And it was one night, not long after I came out of hospital, that I had a dream. And in this dream, I saw New York City, and I saw places in and around New York City, and I saw myself standing there, and there were just things that were happening. And I woke up from the dream and I wrote everything down, and I sat on the edge of the bed and I just said to God, if this is you, I need you to make it real. But if it isn't, I need you to take it away, because at the place where I am now, in this place of brokenness and hurt, I cannot take any more disappointments. And I dreamt the same dream for the next 14 nights. And every night in the dream, there was more and more detail and more information, that I had almost the exact date that I would be leaving South Africa. And it was unbelievable. And I knew it was God because I had asked him, make it real or take it away. And it became more and more real. And when I eventually went to book the tickets to travel overseas, the date that was available at the cheapest possible price was the one that I had dreamt, the 27th of January. And in this journey, and it became a journey, there was a lot of things that happened. And one day I'll share the whole story. But in this journey, not only did it help in the healing process and the restoration process of my leg, but it brought me to a place where I was able to surrender everything to God. I had been in a position before where I had lost stuff. I'd lost my businesses, silly things. Most of the times I start a business that's sort of service orientated, and my hands are what make it work. So if anything happens to me physically, the business obviously suffers. So I got to this point, and I had not ever been put off by losing stuff, because I would just get up and start again and journey on. But this was different. God was totally in control. I traveled from South Africa to the United Kingdom, to the United States, and to Norway, and back to South Africa and to Zambia. And I constantly did that circuit for almost 6 years of my life. And never once did I have to ask for money. Never once did I have to put my hand in my pocket to look for money. Never once was I without a place to stay, or without food, or without what was needed for that journey. Never. God's provision was there in every single circumstance. It was unbelievable. And when I was sitting up in the mountains in Norway one very rainy week at the end of May, beginning of June, I had been stuck up in this cabin in the mountains for a week. I was meant to be doing some painting on somebody's cabins up there, but the rain had sort of set in and it wasn't going anywhere. But I had to get from the cabins where I was staying back to the local village, which was a 14.5 kilometer bicycle ride. And I woke up in the morning at 7:30, and I sat on the end of the bed and I said, God, I need you to hold back the rain. Not stop the rain. My prayer was very clear. I need you to hold back the rain. I've got to get on my bicycle at 9 o'clock, and I've got to cycle those 14 kilometers back to the village. And I'm trusting you as my Father with all that is within me to hold back the rain. And that was it. I left it in God's hands. This had been a period now of going on 9 to 10 months of this journey with God, where I had seen his hand over and over again in various different things, various aspects, not just in provision, in healings and stuff that I witnessed, and God's power and his love being poured out. And at 9:10, I started locking up the cabin, made sure I switched off the power, got my bag, walked out the front door, and I locked it. And I had to walk about maybe 100 meters from the cabin down this pathway and this staircase that was carved into the side of the mountain with my bag. My bicycle was at the bottom of the staircase. And as I walked out from under the eaves of the building, the rain stopped. It eased up to this very, very light drizzle as I walked down that pathway. And I put my bag on the back of the bicycle and secured it there at 2 minutes to 9. And I got on that bicycle and I started cycling down the dirt road back towards the tarred road. And the rain was not coming down. I looked up at the heavens above me, and it was almost as though God's hands were there holding back the clouds. Remember my prayer: hold back the rain, not stop it, just hold it back. And I cycled that 14 and a half kilometers, just giving thanks and worshiping God and enjoying what my Father was doing for me. And I rode into the little village and got to the house of the family that I was staying with, put my bicycle into the garage and took my bag off the back. And I walked into the house and closed the front door. And as I let go of the door handle, it started to rain. And it rained for the next 7 days. Now, that was for me something that I had to experience in my life to fully understand and know that when God says He is my Father, I can trust Him with my whole heart at full face value that He is who He says He is. And He will never, ever fail me. My request was clear. My request was specific. I don't want to pray against every other human that's praying for rain. I'm just praying for my safe passage. And my Father undertook, and it was given unto me as I requested in that most precious name with a measure of joy. Because I tell you, the elation, the excitement by the time I got back at what God had done was absolutely unbelievable. And from then, it's just been this journey. And it hasn't been a perfect ride. There have been some David encounters in my life, and there has been a wedge that has often been pushed in. But guess what? His love towards me is unfailing, unending, and unwavering. And no matter what, He is still my Father, and He will wait patiently at the gate like the father of the prodigal son for me to come home, or anyone. All He desires is for us to be in that relationship. And it never, ever changes. Our actions never change who we were created and intended to be. We were created and intended to be in relationship with Him as our Father. So I hope this has helped. I hope it makes sense to you, some of you on the call tonight. And I hope we're getting an understanding of where I'm trying to take us in this journey. Because if we don't grasp the value of understanding who God is to us, then there's almost no power in the prayers that we pray because we don't really know who we're talking to. And we don't really know if we can trust Him. And so we just send up a prayer on a whim. And we find it hard then to attach faith to that prayer because we just don't know who it is that we're engaging with. So that's all I want to share with us tonight. I know it's been a little longer than usual, but that's where we'll end for now.
Thank you, Andrew. That was a good message. Anybody got any questions for Andrew regarding engagement with God, your Father?
Thanks for that testimonial. It's very, it's good. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris.
Yeah, I write you a message, but thank you. It was very, very special.
You are welcome.
Thank you, Andrew.
I just want to add on something that I was thinking about while Andrew was talking. David was always one of his favorite children, although he was a sinner. And that made me think of that thing about footsteps in the sand. I'm going to quickly, I posted it in the motivational group or topic. Let me go find it quickly. Maybe we can get it open big enough. I don't know if you can see this. It's about somebody that had a dream, and there were two sets of footsteps, and then suddenly there's only one step. And the person asked God, "Why did you leave me?" He said, No, that's the times that I carried you when you were not strong enough to walk. Go read that. It's posted in the motivational topic. Very powerful piece that as well. There's nothing you can do. Absolutely nothing you can do to stop God's love for you. That is as easy as that. So build that relationship with Him. Right. We did say that we're going to give people a chance to compare their earthly fathers with God our Father, if they want to. Is there anybody that wants to do that? It's voluntary. I'm not
I'll
going to force
share
any.
about my
Sorry.
father.
Yes.
I'll share about my father a little bit. Okay.
Please do.
So, um, so at the time that I was born, in the 1960s, there was a lot of turmoil going on in the US, and a lot of it was different because of different ethnicities. I don't use the word race because I only believe that there is one race, the human race, but there are definitely, obviously, different ethnicities. And so at the time that I was born, in 1964, there were a lot of marches going on and a lot of turbulence all across the US because of this. And my parents are of two ethnicities, different, very vastly different ethnicities. And so my father, he was absolutely a miraculous being and absolutely a child of God. And he inspired my life so much that I know I probably wouldn't be here if not for his presence in my life. Just full of divine love and guidance, and it's well that he was that way, because I do believe that everything is in sacred synchronicity. So, for example, the stories that you were sharing, Andrew, about being, protected. You never had to reach your hand into your pocket rather, for money when you were traveling, and you were always provided for. This is always there. However, I also have come to believe that things happen for us and not to us. So if you hadn't had that experience with watching your biological father behave that way, you wouldn't be the person that you are. And so in my life, I had a very challenging relationship with my mother. And it was, I think at the time, it was exacerbated because there was almost this mythology going on, in not with everyone, but a lot of the people in the US, that whoever was quote unquote white, I don't like to call people by colors, but I'm just using that to kind of share this. Whoever was white was right. And I think that my mother had no idea when she became a part of a mixture family, how challenging it would be for her. And so she took out her resentment and her anger on me, because I'm a child that is has darker skin and curlier hair and that sort of a thing. And so with my father, he understood all of that, and he was able to have so much love for all of us and be such a guiding presence because he was full of love and full of light. And by trade, he was a teacher, and he was always voted the favorite teacher of the year at every school that he ever taught at. And I think it's because he would do away with a lot of things that aren't necessary, and that in ways his power came not from being harsh and strict, but rather from showing. Andrew, you mentioned, do as I do, not do as I say. And that was him. He really walked his talk. And so sometimes growing up, I would feel sad because my mother never once hugged me. And I realized that one time when I was 38 years old. And she gave me a little brief hug, and it was outside of and it was in a public place. And I knew that she was doing it not because she wanted to, but because people were expecting her to give me a hug at that moment. And so what I have, though, because of the relationship that I have with God, is I know that things happen for me and not to me. And so in my life, I've really, really been blessed with all of these experiences, and knowing that God is everywhere. And there, like you mentioned, Andrew, there's nothing that we can do that will take God's love away from us. And so, yeah, I just wanted to share that. So thank you all for listening.
Thanks for that, Dimitra. That's a very powerful testimony. Right. Is there anybody else that wants to say anything before we stop the recording? I do need to scream a little bit today, but I'm not going to record that. Yes, Bridget, you're number one to be screamed at.
No, sorry, I was just applauding what I've just
No, I
heard.
thought you were
Sorry.
applauding for me because you're making ready for my screams. All right, people, that's it then for today. We're going to have another call next week. Same time. Andrew is still here for two Sundays before he goes on a 3-week break down to his family in Jeffreys Bay. We'll see how long next week is going to be, and then I'm going to give you homework for the last week's call. Severe homework. All right, I'm going to stop the recording.